Echoes of vengeance, deeds and rewards. They didn't know he was protected by the unseen, the terrifying end of Veronica. There is a terrifying truth about the universe that many refuse to accept until it is too late. It is the truth that life is not just a classroom, but a courtroom. Every deed is a test, every intention is recorded, and when men fail the test, the great examiner steps in. Listen to me carefully. The invisible force that governs the affairs of men does not check your religious affiliation. It does not care about your tribe, your denomination, or how loudly you shout your prayers in public. It responds to one thing and one thing only: the silent echoes of your actions. There are people walking this earth right now whose sheer integrity and pure actions have invoked unseen beings to stand guard over them, a personal shelter that no weapon can penetrate. And there are others who, in their greed, dig their own graves with alarming precision, utterly unaware that the universe is watching. This is the story of two men, one empire, and the terrifying, absurd precision of divine justice. The brotherhood of two worlds. The autumn breeze swept through the courtyard of St. Matthew's College. Fatom Adewale sat on a concrete bench, staring at the exam results pasted on the notice board. Fatom was born into a world of velvet and gold. He was the only son of Chief Adewale, a titan of industry who owned a sprawling importing empire and a state-of-the-art private hospital network in the heart of the city. Fatom had never known the sting of hunger. Beside him stood Timothy Mensah. Timothy had nothing but the clothes on his back, a sharp mind, and a spirit forged in the fires of discipline. Raised by a widowed mother, in a neighborhood where electricity was a luxury, Timothy studied by candlelight, fueled by a relentless drive to honor his mother's sacrifices. Fatom pointed at the board. "You topped the class again," he said with a grin. "You know, if intelligence were currency, you'd be richer than my father." Timothy laughed softly, a sound grounded in humility. "And if loyalty were gold, my friend, you'd own a continent." Fatom's smile faded into something deeply serious. He looked at Timothy not as a charity case, but as an equal. "Promise me something, Tim. No matter what life brings us, money, power, status, or women, we won't let it break this brotherhood." Timothy extended his hand. "We build together, or we fall together." They shook hands. Two young men. One promise. They did not know it then, but heaven was listening. That simple, pure pact of loyalty registered in the unseen realms. Timothy's lack of envy and Fatom's lack of pride created an invisible shield around them. The trust transfer and the seed of envy. Years passed. The boys became men. And the time came for Chief Adewale to make a decision that would alter the destiny of his family forever. He summoned Timothy to his mansion. The opulent walls of the estate felt heavy, lined with imported mahogany and the silent weight of immense wealth. The old chief leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes sharp and unblinking. "Timothy, I have watched you for years. I have seen young men who are intelligent but arrogant. I have seen rich men who are foolish but proud. You are neither. Intelligence without character is a loaded gun pointed at its owner. But intelligence with integrity, that builds empires." Timothy stood silently, listening. "I want you to manage one of my major importing companies," the chief declared. "My son, Fatom, is traveling abroad for his advanced medical studies. I need someone I can trust." Timothy swallowed hard. "Sir, I don't come from wealth. I have no collateral. Perhaps you should reconsider." The chief leaned forward. "That is exactly why I choose you. My son has privilege. You have hunger. But more importantly, you have honor." Fatom, standing by the door, placed a firm hand on Timothy's shoulder. "You are my brother. If anyone can protect my father's legacy, it is you." And so, Timothy accepted the mantle. He applied the same ruthless discipline he used to study by candlelight to the corporate world. Within 2 years, the importing company transformed. Revenues doubled. Corrupt leakages were blocked. Fraudulent systems were dismantled, and the workers, for the first time, were paid fairly and on time. Chief Adewale was so impressed he began introducing Timothy at high society events as the son I did not give birth to. But in the shadows of the mansion, a dark seed was taking root. Mrs. Veronica Danjuma, the chief's second wife and Fatom's stepmother, watched from the balcony. Her lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. She was an ambitious, controlling woman. Her own daughter, Agnes, had recently married Timothy. To the outside world, this cemented the family bond. But in Veronica's heart, it was an insult. How could this street boy, who married her daughter, now hold the keys to her husband's greatest assets? How could he possess more influence over the family wealth than she did? Jealousy is a quiet disease. It does not shout. It whispers in the dark, feeding on insecurities, until it demands blood. The parasites. When Fatom returned from abroad as a certified medical specialist, Chief Adewale handed him the reins to the family's crown jewel, the private hospital. The city rejoiced. 2 brothers, one managing the wealth, the other managing the health. But Veronica saw her opening. If she could not dislodge Timothy from the importing empire, she would infiltrate Fatom's hospital, drain it, and create a crisis that would force Timothy to funnel money into her hands. She played her role perfectly. The caring, concerned stepmother. She recommended a man named Charles for the role of chief accountant at the hospital. "He is brilliant," Veronica told Fatom. "International exposure. He will optimize your billing." Fatom, trusting to a fault, approved the hire. What he did not know, what no one knew, was that Charles was not just an accountant. He was Veronica's secret lover. Within months, the rot began. The hospital, which was supposed to be a beacon of healing, became a slaughterhouse of funds. Equipment procurement invoices were forged. Millions were transferred to shell companies. While Fatom was busy saving lives in the operating room, Charles and Veronica were siphoning the hospital's lifeblood. With the stolen money, they secretly began funding the construction of a private, state-of-the-art medical facility in a neighboring country. Their greed morphed into arrogance. They believed they were untouchable. The cry that pierced the veil. But the universe does not sleep. And the unseen watchers are always provoked by the cries of the innocent. One rainy evening, the true consequence of Veronica's corruption manifested. The hospital, starved of its operating funds by Charles, had implemented cruel, unofficial policies mandated by corrupt staff loyal to the accountant. A pregnant woman was rushed into the emergency ward. She was hemorrhaging. Her husband, drenched in rain and tears, held her as she screamed in agony. Behind the reception desk stood Nurse Gladys, a woman whose heart had long been hardened by the hospital's new culture of greed. "Please," the husband begged, his knees hitting the cold tiles. "She's losing blood. Call the doctor." Gladys adjusted her uniform, her face a mask of supreme indifference. "Did you deposit the emergency fee?" "I will pay. I swear to God I will pay, just save her." Gladys rolled her eyes. "Swearing doesn't buy oxygen. Deposit first." Time ticked by. The woman's cries grew weaker, dissolving into pathetic, suffocating gasps. No doctor was called. No urgency. Just the cold, mechanical hum of a corrupted system. But listen to this. This is where human logic ends and divine mechanics begin. Miles away, in his quiet home, Timothy was not on call. He had no business at the hospital. He was sitting in his living room with his wife, Agnes, reviewing some importing manifests. Suddenly, Timothy stopped. His pen froze on the paper. A heavy, suffocating weight dropped into his chest. He stood up, breathing heavily, looking around the empty room. Agnes looked at him, alarmed. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," Timothy whispered, his eyes wide. I feel like someone is dying. I need to go to the hospital. Right now." "Tim, it's pouring rain, and you're not even a doctor." "I have to go." He didn't know why. But the unseen beings that registered Timothy's vow of integrity years ago had sent out the call. His spirit responded. He drove through the blinding rain as if an invisible hand was steering the wheel. If this story is touching you, please hit the like button, subscribe and share, so that the Great Examiner's message can reach more people. Timothy burst through the hospital doors just as the pregnant woman's eyes rolled back. He took one look at the bleeding woman, the weeping husband, and the indifferent nurse. A righteous fury exploded from him. "What is happening here?" Timothy thundered, his voice shaking the glass panes. Nurse Gladys stammered, stepping back. "Yes, sir, the deposit," I said. "What is happening?" Without waiting for an answer, Timothy violently slammed his hand onto the emergency alarm, activating the code blue protocol. He grabbed the reception phone and bypassed protocol, calling Fatom's direct line. "Get to the OR now. We are losing a mother and child." He turned to the security guards. "Wheel her in. Overrule all financial systems. Life first, paperwork later. If she dies, I will personally see you all in prison." The hospital erupted into chaotic action. Fatom sprinted down the stairs, bursting into the theater. After 3 agonizing hours of surgery, both the mother and the child were pulled from the brink of death. Later that night, Fatom found Timothy sitting on a bench in the hallway, his clothes stained with the woman's blood. Fatom sat beside him, exhausted. "You were not scheduled to be here tonight, Tim. How did you know?" Timothy stared at his blood-stained hands. "I didn't. Something bigger than me dragged me here." The strike in the dark. The next day, an emergency committee was formed. Under intense interrogation, Nurse Gladys broke down. She confessed that certain staff were encouraged by the accounts department, specifically Charles, to delay care to maximize desperation fees. Timothy immediately launched a brutal, uncompromising audit of the hospital's finances. He didn't sleep for 3 days. When he emerged from his office, he held the paper trail. The shell companies. The forged invoices. The missing millions. He laid it on Fatom's desk. Fatom was heartbroken, but he was a man of his word. Charles was fired instantly, and the police were notified. When Veronica heard the news, her silent jealousy erupted into a raging, murderous inferno. Timothy had ruined her cash cow. He had exposed her lover. She decided Timothy had to die. She paid 3 hardened assassins a fortune to eliminate him on his way home from a late-night board meeting. The plan was flawless. The route was isolated. But remember what I told you about the personal shelter? The invisible beings, invoked by pure actions? On the night of the hit, the assassins parked their vehicle in the dark stretch of road Timothy always took. They loaded their weapons. They waited. 5 minutes before Timothy's car approached the zone, a massive, heavily armed military patrol, which had never routed through that district before, suddenly experienced a mechanical fault with their armored transport. They pulled over to fix it, inadvertently setting up a massive roadblock right in front of the assassins' hiding spot. The assassins, terrified of being searched by the military, abandoned their mission and fled into the bush. 10 minutes later, Timothy drove past the military men, completely unaware that he had just driven through the valley of the shadow of death. He was untouched. The universe had placed a shield of steel between him and the grave. The poisoned patriarch. Veronica was shaken, but the wicked rarely learn from divine warnings. They only doubled down. Chief Adewale returned from a lengthy overseas business trip. He was tired, but healthy and in good spirits. Veronica, wearing the mask of a loving wife, prepared his welcome home dinner. It was his favorite meal. Into his bowl, she poured a slow-acting, untraceable poison she had procured through Charles's black market contacts. Hours after eating, the great chief Adewale collapsed, clutching his chest. He was rushed to his own hospital. Fatom fought like a madman to save his father. He pumped his chest, pushed every drug, utilized every machine. But the poison had already bound itself to the chief's heart. Chief Adewale died on the operating table, his hand clutching his son's. Before the patriarch's body was even cold, Veronica began her psychological warfare. She wept loudly in the waiting room, tearing her clothes, but between her wails, she dropped poisonous whispers to the extended family and the press. If only Fatom was more careful. She sobbed. Perhaps it was medical negligence. Perhaps Fatom was too eager to inherit the hospital. She wanted to destroy Fatom's reputation, strip him of the hospital board's confidence, and take control as the grieving widow. But Timothy saw through the tears. He ordered an immediate, private autopsy and a full toxicology report, bypassing the hospital's compromised lab and sending the samples abroad. The boomerang of death. The day of Chief Adewale's burial arrived. The city was draped in mourning. Politicians, business moguls, and family members gathered at the sprawling estate. Veronica knew her time was running out. The toxicology reports would be back in days. She had one final move. She had to eliminate Timothy. Without Timothy's financial genius and unyielding integrity, Fatom would crumble, and the empire would be hers. She prepared a special tray of pastries. One specific meat pie, placed dead center, was injected with a lethal dose of a fast-acting toxin. She instructed the head caterer exactly which guest was to receive that specific tray. "Make sure Mr. Timothy eats from this," she ordered. But this is where you must pay attention. This is where the listeners must absorb the absolute absurdity and terror of divine justice. As the caterer walked toward the canopy where Timothy was seated, a sudden, violent gust of wind swept through the compound. It tore down a nearby banner, startling the service. In the brief, chaotic moment of people scrambling to hold the decorations down, a young servant girl accidentally bumped into the caterer, knocking the trays onto a nearby table. Panicked, the caterer quickly rearranged the pastries. But she didn't know which was which. A few minutes later, Veronica, exhausted from her fake crying, walked over to the buffet table. Unaware of the mix-up, she reached for a pastry from a different tray to settle her stomach. She took a bite. By evening, as the guests were leaving, Veronica began to sweat profusely. A sharp, burning pain twisted her intestines like barbed wire. She collapsed in the hallway, vomiting black blood onto the imported Persian rugs. Panic erupted. She was rushed to the very hospital she had tried to destroy. The doctors, Fatom's doctors, worked frantically to save her. But the poison she had sourced was too efficient. It was designed to offer no mercy. The accountant's final audit. Meanwhile, Charles, hiding in a cheap motel across town, received word that Veronica was dying of poisoning. Blind panic seized him. He knew the toxicology report would expose the murder, and with Veronica gone, he had no protection. He packed a duffel bag with forged passports, the deed to the foreign hospital they had built with stolen money, and an illegal firearm. He intended to flee the country that very night. He sped down the highway toward the border. But the great examiner had already graded his paper. A routine police checkpoint, set up solely to check for expired vehicle registrations, flagged Charles down. It was a mundane stop. But Charles, fueled by guilt and paranoia, panicked. As the officer approached his window, Charles reached into his bag, pulled out the illegal firearm, and fired wildly. He missed. The task force returned fire with deadly precision. Charles died instantly, his body slumped over the steering wheel. When the police searched his car, they didn't just find the gun. They found the ledgers, the shell company records, the deeds to the secret hospital abroad. The truth had audited itself. If this story is touching you, please hit the like button, subscribe and share, so that the great examiner's message can reach more people. The confession. Back at the hospital, Veronica was in her final hours. The pain was indescribable, a literal fire burning her from the inside out. Knowing she was entering the dark unknown, terror finally broke her pride. She begged for her youngest daughter. Through blood-stained lips and suffocating gasps, Veronica confessed it all. She confessed the affair with Charles, the theft of the hospital funds, the plot to ruin Fatom, the assassins hired to kill Timothy, and finally, the poison that killed the chief, and the poison she had accidentally eaten herself. She told them where the backup documents were hidden in the mansion. Her daughter, trembling, horrified by the monster her mother had become, took the confession straight to Timothy and Fatom. The two brothers stood in stunned silence as the magnitude of the darkness was revealed. That evening, as authorities confirmed the recovery of the stolen millions and the foreign assets, sounds of jubilation erupted from the hospital staff. Inside her isolation room, Veronica heard the cheering. The empire she had murdered for was restored. The lies she had spun had choked her. Overwhelmed by unbearable physical agony and the crushing psychological weight of utter defeat, Veronica Danjuma died. She was surrounded not by victory, but by consequence. The parasite of the harvest. But the rot of Veronica's bloodline did not die with her. It had a surviving branch. Veronica had a younger brother named Ngoma. 4 years, while Chief Adewale was alive, Ngoma had been a leech on the family's wealth. He was placed in charge of the empire's massive agricultural sector, overseeing the crop farms, the cattle ranches, and the sprawling poultry divisions. Ngoma was a man of staggering incompetence and bottomless greed. Under his management, the farms bled money. He faced several queries from the chief, but every single time, Veronica would manipulate her husband into pardoning him. Ngoma was eventually demoted to a mere figurehead, replaced by a competent manager, but he remained on the payroll, a festering parasite feeding off the chief's mercy. When the chief and Veronica died, a normal man would have felt fear. He would have recognized the judgment of the unseen. But greed makes men blind, and malice makes them foolish. Instead of walking away, Ngoma's audacity mutated. Driven by a venomous hatred for Fatom and Timothy, Ngoma dragged the family to court. In a move of sheer, breathtaking delusion, he attempted to claim that he was the rightful administrator of the agricultural empire, demanding access to the accounts. But the great examiner loves a public disgrace. The court ordered the release of the agricultural records from when Chief Adewale was alive. The ledgers exposed Ngoma's history of gross mismanagement and theft. The judge threw the case out in disgust, ordering Ngoma to remain a basic field worker or resign entirely. Humiliated but unrepentant, Ngoma sank lower into the mud. He found a desperate young man from a neighboring town and brought him before the Family Welfare Board. This, Ngoma declared, is Chief Adewale's secret eldest son. He is the true heir. When the elders demanded proof, the young man proudly presented his mother's bank statements, showing 5 different massive deposits made directly by the late Chief Adewale for upkeep. For a moment, there was silence. Had the honorable chief lived a double life? Timothy calmly took the bank statements, cross-referenced them with the agricultural ledgers, and delivered a crushing blow. The dates and amounts matched perfectly with invoices from the family's cassava processing mill. The woman wasn't the chief's secret lover, she was just a local farmer supplying raw cassava to the factory. The fake heir was chased out of the compound with a fierce warning never to return. Humiliation turned Ngoma into a monster. Consumed by dark malice, he and the fake heir orchestrated a violent armed robbery on Fatom's newly reclaimed hospital. But remember, the unseen watcher does not sleep. The robbers succeeded in stealing cash, but greed divided them. They lied to Ngoma, claiming they were traveling out of town to lay low, but instead, they rented a hotel nearby to secretly share the loot among themselves. A routine police raid on that very hotel caught 3 of them red-handed with the hospital's marked cash. Under interrogation, they sang like birds, exposing Ngoma and the fake heir. The police net tightened. But Ngoma's ultimate doom did not come from the police. It came from the spiritual laws he tried to break. Hiding out at the remote edges of the farm, Ngoma became a tyrant. He intimidated the poor farm workers using dark charms and voodoo. He began secretly packing hundreds of live chickens and pigs into the farm's transport bus, driving them to distant towns to sell for his own pocket, while falsifying records to claim the animals had died of disease. And in the darkest hours of the night, Ngoma took the money he stole from the farm and paid high-level juju priests and practitioners of the dark arts. Their mission? To cast lethal curses to maim, paralyze, and destroy Fatom and Timothy. But Ngoma did not understand the master protocol. He did not know about the personal shelter. When you fire an arrow of dark magic at men whose hands are clean, whose integrity is pure, the curse hits an invisible wall of fire. But a curse cannot just vanish, it must find blood. If it cannot penetrate the target, it boomerangs back to the sender. 2 days after Ngoma paid for the dark rituals, his own son and daughter were traveling on the highway to visit their older sister. A horrific motor accident occurred. Both of his children died on the spot. The universe was demanding its payment. But the final collection was yet to come. On a fateful afternoon, Ngoma drove his stolen farm bus into a crowded, distant market to sell another batch of stolen livestock. He was negotiating a price, his pockets lined with dirty money, feeling invincible. Suddenly, the invisible hand of judgment struck him. Right there in the center of the bustling market, the spirit of absolute madness violently seized Ngoma. His eyes rolled back. He began to scream, violently tearing his clothes to shreds until he stood entirely naked in the dirt. A crowd gathered in shock as the madman began to confess at the top of his lungs. He screamed out every wicked deed. He confessed to the stolen pigs. He confessed to the fake heir. He confessed to the hospital robbery. And as tears and saliva streamed down his face, he screamed about the dark priests he had paid to destroy Timothy and Fatom, weeping over how the curses had rebounded and slaughtered his own children. The crowd, realizing they were standing before a man composed of pure evil, erupted in anger. They surged forward, grabbing him, trying to drag him toward the very farm bus he had used to steal. Terrified, completely out of his mind, and fleeing from the angry mob, Ngoma broke free and sprinted blindly onto the adjacent expressway. He didn't even see the speeding cargo truck. The impact was instantaneous. Ngoma died in the middle of the road, naked, disgraced, and utterly destroyed by the very evil he had birthed. When the news reached Timothy and Fatom, they didn't celebrate. They just looked at each other in silent, terrifying awe. The great examiner had spoken, and his justice was absolute. The legacy of the protected. Timothy and Fatom traveled abroad to reclaim the hidden hospital Charles and Veronica had built. But they did not sell it. They did not hoard the wealth. Instead, they rebranded it as an international extension of the Adewale Medical Group. Under Timothy's financial mastery and Fatom's medical brilliance, the facility became a sanctuary. They instituted a massive community trust. And in memory of the pregnant woman whose near-death had exposed the rot, they mandated free, world-class maternity care for all low-income women across all their hospitals. The institution became synonymous with life, integrity, and unimpeachable honor. People in the city began to whisper, "There is an invisible force protecting those two men," they would say. "Don't cross them. Whatever guards them does not sleep." When Timothy heard these whispers, he would just smile quietly and look up at the sky. He knew it wasn't magic. It wasn't a charm. It was faithfulness. If this story is touching you, please hit the like button, subscribe and share, so that the Great Examiner's message can reach more people. Final reflection. Listen to me, and let this sink deep into your spirit. Jealousy destroys the vessel that carries it. Long before it harms the target, betrayal may rise quickly, like a sudden storm, but justice rises steadily, like the morning sun. It cannot be stopped. When you dig a pit for another human being, measure it well. Measure it to your exact height and weight, because the universe dictates that you will eventually fall into it yourself. Remember that divine intervention is real. It is not owned by the pastors, the imams, or the spiritualists. It is a universal law. Your integrity is your personal shelter. Your pure actions are the call that summons the watchers. Life is a classroom. Every deed is a test. And when the wicked think they have finally won, when they think the room is quiet and no one is watching, the Great Examiner writes the final result. Please do well to share this story. Subscribe to be receiving more. Like it. Know more from our community discussion. There you will be guided to activate the invisible being direction.